G'day and welcome everyone to another episode of Who's Who in the Zoo. This is a podcast where we talk to various people in the ecology of construction, and we talk to our clients, and we're basically wanting to get a real understanding of what's involved in their jobs. This helps us and our engineers be better equipped. They have more empathy or sympathy for the spaces that they're creating. We're trying to do this every fortnight, although it has been a while. But today we've got a terrific interview that I'm going to ask Rebecca Manasinga to introduce to us. Rebecca, who's on today?
Thank you, Rob. Yes, hello everybody, and welcome to Who's Who in the Zoo. So today we are very excited to speak with Ben Williamson, who is one of the founding directors and executive chef of Brisbane-based hospitality group Anyday. But as he tells me, he does look after and manage a lot more things than under those two umbrellas. So, Ben, why don't you tell us about yourself, about how you got into this role, and what sort of role you have in there now? What are your challenges? All that sort of thing.
Great. Well, firstly, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And obviously, Rob, we have a relationship that's spanned the last couple of years, which we've worked on, which has been a very fulfilling relationship for me. And you're really the problem solver for our company, which is something that I don't. I very much appreciate. So, I guess who I am, where I come from, I'm a chef by trade. So, I've been cooking for the good part of 24 years now. To probably give away my age a little bit, but it's I built my way up through kitchens. I've worked all over the world. I've worked all over Australia. Fell back into Brisbane maybe 13, 14 years ago, and I've sort of built up a bit of I suppose a reputation as being a good chef here, and through Gerard's Bistro, which was arguably probably the restaurant that I made my name nationally. And then eventually decided to open my own thing in conjunction with my now business partners, Ty Simon and Frank Lee, which was Agnes Restaurant, which is now probably the restaurant that's most associated with myself and what I do. So from Agnes, we opened just a little bit before the COVID lockdowns. Well, we were about to open when everything locked down, and we ended up doing a pop-up bakery during that time just to I'd sunk my life savings into the business, and we had to do something. I wasn't going to let it all go and start again. So we had to hustle, and we thought retail was going to be fine, and we ended up doing a wood-fired bakery during that time, which became a bit of a cult success, I'd say. We were very lucky, I suppose. It was one of those things that with lockdown, everybody was really bored, and they were happy to go and line up on Agnes Street for 3 hours to get some smoky
Human contact.
average pastry. So they could bring their dogs and socialise, and I think it was a roundabout way of getting there. But it turned into a great success for us. And then since then, we opened the door. After all that happened, we've opened another restaurant during that time, which was Bianca Restaurant at the Kallal Hotel. We weren't a group at that time. We were just existing, separate restaurants. There was already Same and Honto, which Ty and Frank owned individually. And then Bianca, and then after that we opened Agnes Bakery. But at a certain point during that, the boys would have had issues in the other venues that they would want my advice on. And I think with time, I just said, look, I'm happy to help, but why don't I buy into these businesses as well? And eventually I bought in to the other businesses. We formed Anyday as a group, and we, I guess, became a bit of a powerhouse that we are now, and just it evolved very quickly. And I went from being a chef to an executive chef to an owner to a director to just managing all sorts of different things within the business over time, which I've actually found it incredibly fulfilling, and there's a lot of privilege that's afforded with it. And we're still expanding, and next year is going to be a big year for us. We've got a big push next year with a few venues that we're going to open up in Brisbane City. So that's really, in a nutshell, where I've came from and how I fell into it.
So Ben, there's a couple of really interesting things there. Just forgive me, I'm just an engineer. If I can get the toast and the coffee right, everyone's kind of happy. They've got no higher expectations.
Yeah.
When you talk about wood-fired bakery, I'm imagining, in my simple thing, you're baking loaves of bread and you're using timber or maybe charcoal to do the cooking. Is that right?
That's exactly what it is. So And I mean, the challenge with that, I mean, now the bakery is different. I have a custom built oven that works specifically, is built specifically for cooking bread in. But at the time, the oven at Agnes, for Agnes Restaurant, it wasn't designed for bread. So there was some challenges there as well. I had to find a way. Because I mean, look, usually in a conventional wood-fired oven, you want high heat and you want things to cook very quickly. So usually it's upward of 300-400 degrees Celsius inside those ovens. Pizzas are very high temperature; they cook fast. You want fast living. But when you're cooking sourdough and other things like that, it's actually a much slower process to get it there. So I had to find a way to make that work, and the way that was actually it's a rectangular chambered oven. Built by Beach, which is another local company with a big wide mouth. So we had Beach make us an insert that made the mouth of the oven smaller so that it would retain the heat a little bit more. And then I'd build a very thin line of fire over the back of the oven that wasn't too strong. And then I'd actually line up a whole bunch of gastronomes, so stainless steel trays that were deep with water, and then have those as like a bit of a heat block for that fire at the back, which would then generate a little bit of steam, which would help with the leavening of the oven, and then I put a door on the front. So I had to, and again, you're not a chef, I'm not an engineer, but I had to find a way to sort of jerry-rig this oven so it would work. But the reality was that it would be 4 loaves of bread every 45 minutes out of that oven.
Wow. Okay.
So I'd start at maybe 4 o'clock in the afternoon during that period. I had another guy that was making the sourdough. I'd start and I'd cook it at 4 o'clock, and then I'd finish all that sourdough by 10 o'clock the next morning. So I was working all the way through the night. It was very long hours, but to be honest, I really loved it, and it was a great time for me. There were a few moments at 3 a.m. when I'm sort of looking around this old building that is Agnes and getting a bit, creeped out by all the sounds and the creaky noises and everything that was going on in there, being on my own. But I mean, that's it. But the oven in the bakery that we have now is what they call a Scotch oven. So it has an offset chamber where we'd light the fire, and then that chamber feeds the heat through into a central chamber where you cook the bread, and it creates, rather than having an extraction that's just above the door, the extraction is up in one of the corners, and it's a very small hole where the air gets out. But what it does, it creates a convection inside the chamber. And I have a steam injection system that's built into it as well, so we can keep steam in there. So that in the initial process, where it rises, and you get that beautiful ear that comes up off the sourdough. Steam, you want steam for that, so that it doesn't form a crust, and you end up with these stunted torpedoes. But then in that last part, it starts to dry out, and then we usually choke it at a certain point so that you can get a bit more smoke coming into that oven. You get a smoky flavour in the bread, but very different. Now that works really well. The challenge during lockdown was trying to make it work in an oven that was not built for purpose.
So I'm supposed to be getting to some other questions, but I'm actually really fascinated about the timber cooking.
Yeah.
You can't turn up the gas or turn up the power with timber cooking. So do you just set it up and that wasn't quite enough heat? Next time I'll add another block of wood. Is there a lot of experimentation?
Yeah, definitely.
To get to the process?
The ovens are easy enough because they're all sort of contained and it contains heat and it's easy for it to keep going. But I mean, when you've got the grills that are over the top of the wood, that's very much a different thing. And usually, cooking over burning wood is not ideal because you have a lot of volatile chemicals that will come off that impart a bit of a, when you get that sort of smoky flavour that's a bit acrid, it's got an acridity to it. That's from the volatile chemicals in the initial burn. It's better to cook on once it's already burnt and you have a coal base to get it there. But it really is. But the challenge is if you leave it too long and your coals get too cold and then you have to throw some more wood on top of it, when you put the wood on initially, it actually drops the temperature even more before that starts to burn and then comes back up and you get that volatility. So the challenge is, firstly, the guys that work in Agnes, they're usually there because they love it and they're really into it. And it takes them, we get a new guy that's on that grill section, it will really be 2 months of training until he's properly proficient in managing that fire. But then afterwards, you just get good at reading that situation. But you have to be on your toes. You've got to really be 15 minutes ahead of what's going on, and if you're not and you leave it, you're really going to be in trouble. And especially when you've got 100 people that are out there and you've got all these tickets lined up and they're waiting for their food, they're not going to be interested that you've forgotten to tend to the fire and it's taking an extra 15 minutes to get the steak on the table. So it's a pretty good. You mess it up once, it's a pretty good motivator to not do it again because you'll have a lot of angry bosses getting upset with you and customers coming up to the pass. And with Agnes being very open, the customers do come up if things are taking too long, and they'll say something to you directly.
So Ben, nice segue into the question about what your typical day looks like. My memory or vision of it is lots of long hours, as you said already, kind of getting in there before the sparrows get up.
Yeah.
And then long days and then cleaning up after everyone's gone home.
Yeah.
Is that what it's like at certain phases in your career?
Yeah.
Or is that always what it's like? How does that progress in your
No,
typical
definitely.
day?
Look, it's different now. There's a lot of focus on the labour laws for chefs these days, and off the back of the famous example of George Columbaris and the wage theft thing that he was going through. But I mean, before that, in those days, there wasn't really any. No one was really looking at how much chefs were working. So an 80-hour working week was pretty normal for me back in those days. And that would be, you'd get up in the morning and there'd be certain suppliers. I'd come into work, make sure everyone's on top of what they're doing, check the produce that's coming in is the right, the quality that we need, not needing to be sent back. Then there's specialised people that I would go out. So I'd go to the seafood market and I'd see what's fresh and what's good out there, and then I'd buy that and I'll bring it back to the restaurant and do a little bit of running around in that way. Then you would do a little bit of prep and start to set up. If you're doing lunches, you'd set up for your lunch service. You get on the pass ready to go. You make sure everyone's comfortable in their sections and they're on top of everything. Of course, make sure the equipment's working properly, make sure things are cleaned properly the night before, and so many moving parts to do with it, as you can imagine. And then, the afternoon you might get an hour or half an hour to get out and just have a little bit of a break, usually get something to eat, come back in for service, ready for the evening. And then by the time service is finished, you're talking maybe a busy restaurant, 11 o'clock-ish. Then an hour to clean everything down, maybe another half an hour to go through your ordering and ensure that you've got the stuff coming in that you need for the next day. So that's a pretty normal day in the old days. And you can see how those hours would stack up. And if you throw breakfast into the mix with that, which we used to do at Gerard's on the weekends, that's an even longer day still. But I suppose now, with the way that it is, we really just, it's all down to coaching, training, making sure you're delegating to the people beneath. So it's not just that old trope of the head chef takes care of everything and is a control freak and keeps everyone else in check. So now it's, offsetting some of your responsibilities to the people that are beneath you so that they can then filter that down to the people beneath them. So you have progression and growth and a bit more, which is something we focus now that we're a big group, and we have just shy of 300 staff now within the group. And, next year that'll double in size to even more. So, making sure we have a succession plan for these people, that we're building them up and developing them to be the future leaders of the future restaurants that we're trying to expand into is a big part of it. And, now past those 80-hour working weeks, you'd be looking now into, most chefs up until the sous chef and the head chef level, which is the sous chef is the second in charge, head chef, and then you could potentially have an executive chef over the top if it's a busy place. Those three would probably work 50 to 54 hours tops. And then everybody else underneath that, you'd be looking at a 44-hour working week. So, any more than that, what we've found, they can work further, but if you're going to pay people properly and you're going to do it well, you're going into the realm of time and a half and double time and a half, which is, you're better off probably just employing more employees to have more pairs of hands, and not, because you're kind of giving the money away for nothing at that point. But also bearing in mind, the construction industry, which you guys are working with, is still pretty normal for people to do pretty obscene hours, right?
It is, and some of the things that you're just touching on there are resonating with me. I look after people, and we have some things to look after about how they function, and there is a whole history there of long crazy hours.
Yeah.
For us, we don't unfortunately pay double time or time and a half, but you pay no matter what you do. If somebody's working long hours and they don't love what they're doing, well, they won't probably stay with you for long.
Yeah.
I'm struck by a couple of things. You said that the chefs really love what they do. Are they at the point where they're arguing with you about what the menu should be? Is that where the passion gets to?
But to be honest, I would encourage that. I think, conflict brings recourse, but it's also different perspectives will
Just
end up
be
getting.
careful here, Ben. Just be careful here. Your employees are going to hear this.
They will.
If you're
This is
saying bring it
nothing.
on,
This is nothing I
buddy.
wouldn't say to them anyway. And most of the time, I'm actually encouraged them to argue more. Come in. There's a particular head chef we got within the group that Ty will come in or someone else will come in and say, "Hey, this dish, I really think it's not right. You need to, bring this. This is more what the people are going to love." But then I'll sit down with them. I'm like, well, didn't you come up with this dish? Do you not want to maybe argue and fight for your point of your reason why you want to do it, so you believe in it? Because if you're putting a dish up that you don't believe in, you're doing it for the wrong reasons, you're never going to care about it, and it's only going to slide off. And that's what I find is, you have to get the buy-in from the guys so that they feel ownership over the product and they believe in it and they care about it, because it's the only way it's going to work. And if you don't believe in it, cooking's very much tied to emotion. And if you're tired, and because it's a creative thing, if you're tired or you're grumpy or you've fought with your wife or your girlfriend's leaving, whatever it is that's happening at home, if you're coming in on those days, your food's going to taste like that. It really is connected to it.
Wow.
So in a roundabout way, like correcting the hours for people, the bonus from it is people are fresh all the time. You get more productivity. They're better with their time management. They're happier when they're there. So that all comes through in the product in the end. And I think it's definitely for the best. And there's probably something there to be learned for other industries as well.
So Ben, I can imagine, for the chefs who've grown up cooking since mum let them, I can imagine that's true. What about there'd be a whole heap of staff who are setting tables and pouring wine. Do you think they come with the same passion, or is theirs more of perhaps just a pride in my role? I just really want to do this role well.
Yeah, and
what are the drivers, I guess, for the other staff?
Well, that's you would hope that it's really the pride over what it is that they're bringing to it. I mean, when it's in the front, it's all about customer service, right? So we try to hire people that have the personality for the front of house, that they care about customer service, they care about human engagement, they care about the story that we're trying to sell. Because I think what's important in a great restaurant is that it's not just you're coming in to get fed some tasty food. It's really there's got to be a connection and a story and a vibe and some theatrics to it, and some way that it ties into the design and the music and the lighting, and all these things all come into play to end up with a result that people are going to sit down. Yes, they're coming to order plates of food and some drinks to go with it, but it all needs to tie together in a way that it's transformative or transportive for them and takes them somewhere else that's outside of their day-to-day lives. I think that's a really important part of a great restaurant.
And it's the whole experience, I think you're saying.
Yeah, and we're selling good times is really what we're doing. We're trying to get people in and sell them that they can forget about their worries and their woes, just sit and be present on the table with the people that they're sitting with as well, engage, have fun, be surprised, I think, is probably an important part. Have a little bit of a surprise of what's happening. But so for the servers, we want them to really be the purveyors of that. They need to be the sort of people that are coming tableside and really just getting the mood where it needs to be, or turning around a difficult customer. And that's a big thing. We train pretty hard on that, just how to manage and turn around somebody that might have come in that's not having a great time. And I've been to great restaurants as well that I can tell you that overseas, that something's happened and I'm annoyed and I'm off, and I get in there and I am prone to fits of grumpiness from time to time. Sit down and a good restaurant and a good server will completely turn you around very quickly. And I think it's an important part of what we do.
Fantastic. So Ben, I'm going to ask you some of the harder questions now. I have sent you a little list of tough exam questions, tough marks, but what's a bad day? You have described arriving at work in a funk, but what other things lead to a bad day? A day that you go, "Jeez, this is hard work." What's a day like that?
There's plenty of things that will affect that. Firstly, if something's been dramatically mishandled in one of the restaurants the day before, and you have to come in and get people into trying to recover an experience for somebody aggressively, and we've got a pretty good team for doing that. That can be a bad day from time to time. But as you would be aware of, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners can appreciate, a bad day is a day where at a critical moment and fan goes down, an extraction fan goes down and you can't cook anymore, and then you need to scramble to try and get the people in to get that resolved, because these are some of the things that would shut down an operation, and it's a very tightly oiled machine within the restaurants time to time, and every moment and every second is very important for the whole package to come together, one of those things goes wrong, it can just be disastrous. And when it's something that's a compound problem and it's going to take days to fix, then it's about managing the mood, or the what's the word I'm looking for? Managing the culture in there, the morale of the staff, so that it's not sliding into a point where, because they can really get beaten down from time to time. Like another one where the dishwasher goes down, in the middle of service, and you can't punch the stuff through, and you got to call in some extras, and people just hands to get things in pots and scrubbing and boiling water, and the water's not hot enough, and you got to clean that down next. And it's just those moments of an already stressful environment that just hits utter panic. But with time, and like myself, and something you're trying to impart with the guys, it's really just about managing the morale, making sure you're just not letting it get you down as a leader, and you're just picking everyone else up, and it's like, okay, we can get through this, it's fine. Plus, whoever's in charge having good relationships with the people that can come and fix it, because if you don't work on that relationship and you don't have a good rapport with your contractors, if you ring them on a Friday at 6 p.m. when they're in the pub having a drink, they're just not going to worry about you if you haven't worked on that relationship. But I've always thought it was important to work hard on a relationship with those contractors and do them favours in return and look after them like they're very important people, because you never know on that day they might just be inclined to say, actually, yeah, you know what, I'll head in now and I'll fix this issue for you.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. Let me ask you then, Ben. Clearly, perhaps more than some industries, your team very heavily relies on the environment in which they work. And we had a bit of a chat about this before we started.
Yeah.
I am curious about, the relative value of lighting, the relative value of air conditioning and temperature,
Yeah.
the relative value of ventilation. Clearly you rely on it, which means it must have a floor or basic level that it works. What about if it's exceptional? Where does that play? Is it worth being exceptional in that space?
I think it's everything. And I don't think we have ever fully got right the design of the back of house spaces yet. It's something we're working on. And there's a juggle when you're talking about space and having enough space for storage, for functionality, for pigeonholes for staff, an area for them to go and sit down and have something to eat or have a coffee. All these sorts of things are usually the first thing to go, because when you're talking about the economics of a restaurant, it's, the more room you have for customers, the more money you can generate to cover off rent and everything else. So you want to kind of get that formula right to have the right mix, so it works for the business, it works for the bottom line, but it also works for the team. But most importantly, for the team, and again, talking about morale, too much space sometimes is a problem, because
in the back of house.
Yeah, you have to walk. If there's another 10 steps per job that you have to do, it makes people more tired, it fatigues them faster. So you almost want to have just the right amount of space in the right amount of places, that they don't have to go far or stress too much to get what they need to be able to get the job done. Having the right flooring that's non-slip, so that, if someone wears the wrong shoes on whatever day they're there and they're slipping around in the kitchen all the day, they can fatigue them as well and just get frustrating. Also, it's a hazard if they're carrying a hot pot of whatever, that's going to go down. That's an important step. Lighting is a big one. So for us, all our restaurants are quite dark and quite dim, and we do that specifically because we think it generates the right amount of mood within the restaurants. But then our kitchens, most of them are quite exposed. And so there's always a fine line. Ty, my business partner, he's very much customer focused, and the lighting of the kitchen needs to be dim so that it's not glaringly aggressive on the customers that are sitting there. But then on the other side, I'm like, I'm working in those spaces. If you make that lighting too dim, staff just get tired. It starts to wear them down. They start to get in that, that old thing that they say in the house, that you should have really dim, warm lighting at night, because it's going to help you get a better sleep and it'll help you wind down. You don't want bright lights. But then it's also getting the right cleaning lights in there so you can see the details when everything's getting done. So what we do now is we switch in. So we'll have a whole cleaning light system that's separate, and it's on a separate control. We can dim or turn up the lights within the kitchen and isolate different parts for different reasons, which we probably wouldn't have to do, but it just makes the jobs of the people that are working in it much easier. Temperature's a big one too. Kitchens can get really hot. So having the right amount of extraction that's taking the right amount of air from the space, that the makeup air is making sure the extraction, so the airflows are working well, that it's not stealing the aircon from the restaurant, but then also having an aircon that's strong enough to be able to cope with that on the other side. It's also not loud and blowing a gale in people's faces. All of those things are really important as well. And in a lot of our restaurants, we've got that wrong in the early days. Agnes is probably the best one. And the thing with Agnes, if the extraction's not quite right, if it's extracting too much, then you're going to burn twice as much wood. And the amount of wood, I think in a quarter we spend upwards of $20,000 on wood to burn at Agnes. Like it's not an insignificant cost. And if that's off and the extraction's taking too much air, it's going to burn the wood twice as fast. And so we're going through twice as much wood, and that's going to be an expensive undertaking. And then obviously not extracting enough, you get smoke that starts leaking out and it starts to get into the restaurant. And I know this is a thing that you're intimately involved in, Rob, because you've come and solved some major problems for us in regards to the extraction. And the reason is, look, and when it comes to consulting with the right people, you just, with time you learn who knows what they're talking about, who cares, which consultants actually care about, firstly, that it's not just the most functional but also incredibly expensive solution to it. You need to find the right people that care about basically, the bottom line for the owners that are building it, but then also the functionality and the efficiency within the business. And that doesn't just come down to the extraction. That comes down to the aircon guys. It comes down to, like you said, the guys who are doing the lighting and your sparkies. And with time you just find the right people to get the right thing done.
So I'm not a wannabe chef. I just want to say that now. But I wanted to ask about the timber, the quality of the timber. Yeah. I'm presuming that has an impact on the taste.
Yeah, definitely.
Or is it any old timber as long as it burns? Tell me a bit about. You talk about spending $20,000 on timber. Yeah. I'd be flat out spending $100 a year at the BP to get some timber for the fireplace.
Yeah.
That sounds to me like you've got trucks arriving every few days full of timber.
Yeah. Twice a week.
So what sort of timber?
So we burn, the main timber that we burn at Agnes is Western Ironbark. So there's another one that you can use. So Tasmanian oak burns really well. There's another one called Baker's oak, which is good. They have different densities, and so they burn in different ways. And so oak burns quickly, but it burns very hot. Ironbark is more of a slow burn, and you get a better coal. It's slightly less hot, but it has a little more longevity to the way that it burns. But all wood, the first thing is you're not going to go and pick up an old fence post and then cook some food over the top of it, because it's going to be full of chemicals and treated and a bit of an issue. You don't want any of that sort of stuff. It's got to be pretty natural and not be near any form of sprays or pesticides or anything like that. It's got to be aged. So once it's felled, it's got to be, cut up into pieces and then sat somewhere dry for probably, you wouldn't want to take anything shorter of 6 months of aging at least, up to a year. The longer it ages, because it gets the moisture out of the wood, it starts to settle down. It gets a little more dense, and it just burns cleaner and hotter and better. Green wood, you can cook with green wood and you can burn, which is easier, or just freshly felled, but you get a wrong flavour off it. It just has a volatile flavour and it takes forever to burn. Wet wood as well. So when, being in Queensland, obviously we're in so many storms, and, right now we're in that season of it. If the wood's stored somewhere and it gets absolutely soaked, especially for us at Agnes, the way we cook and how much we need that, we rely on the time, it adds probably double the burning time to get it to the coal as it would before, and that is problematic. And we get to that point if we're not storing it properly, or one of the guys hasn't bothered to bring it downstairs and pack it away properly, and then it dumps down and all the wood gets wet. That's going to be a bad time for them. But again, the guys that are cooking on it, it's a motivator to not make that mistake again, because your life's going to suck that night when you're trying to keep up with everything and it's taking twice as long. We use other wood as well, so. The reason ironbark as well is reasonably economical, and there's a lot of it around and it's easy to get. But then we also use things like cherry wood, pecan, banksia cones. What else? Black wattle we've burnt with before. Any of those fruit woods, apple, peach, plum wood. All of those actually have a completely different smell or aroma to the wood. And honestly, it really is quite evocative. And from time to time, I'll do masterclasses in Agnes with some lucky people that we sell it out for whoever, that I'll burn these different woods and then take them around so that, burning so everyone can get an idea of the smoke and the smell and how it comes on. But you can actually see, it's very subtle, but peach wood kind of vaguely smells of peaches, Cherry wood, not so much cherries, but cherry wood for me is the gold standard of all wood. The flavour that you get of smoking with cherry wood is just incredible. Olive wood's a really funny one as well. So with olive wood, you burn it and it really is kind of briny. Like the smell of the smoke on olive wood, it smells like BO sweat. Like it's not a great smell. It's kind of horrific. And it's a good one for playing pranks on people in the kitchen if they're not prepared for it. You give them a whiff of it, it's quite aggressive. But again, and when you're talking about the things that you cook with those, especially when you're putting in a smoker and you burn, that's where those come into play. That is really contained and it's getting it done. Cherry's awesome for duck, or game meats. So cherries normally you would eat with duck. So all those rules of the things that go together, they apply to the wood and what you're cooking with them as well. Applewood with pork is delicious. Applewood with fish and seafood is delicious. So those sort of things work. But this olive wood, which you would burn it normally and go, I'm never going to smoke anything with that because it's so horrific. When you smoke lamb with olive wood, it is so delicious, and there's nothing like it. And that particular aspect of it doesn't come through in the product. It's only when you're inhaling it once it's burning. But yeah, it's really interesting. And the more you get to play with those sort of things, you just spark these little different ideas. And Agnes usually, even though we cook on the iron bark, we have like a little small smoker that's off on the side of one of the cook lines. We'll rest inside that smoker and just let those different things permeate for the final stage of cooking, so you just get this elevated little part. But also, all those fruit woods, they probably cost 4 to 5 times as much as the iron bark. So you wouldn't be cooking exclusively on those because we'd either one go broke really quickly, which is the most likely thing, but the customer just wouldn't be prepared to pay for that, and they probably wouldn't pick up on the difference as much. Yeah.
So Ben, you're certainly changing our demographic here. We normally talk about buildings. You're making this much closer to a sort of cooking show. But I do want to ask you a couple of things, Ben. I think for our listeners' benefit, we haven't really explained that one of your specialties is cooking with timber, which is in I guess layman's terms, building fires inside buildings, and then cooking food with it. The fire brigade doesn't get too excited about people just getting a little fire going. What sort of run-ins have you had with them, and are they sort of really kind of calm and cool about this, or do they get particularly antsy, or do they take a position about whether the chef is being quite responsible around the fire? What happens with fire? The fire brigade?
Well, with the fire brigade, when you're talking about that, I mean, firstly, we have different types of extinguishers for different reasons within the kitchen, and a CO2 extinguisher is the one that we're told to use when the issues of fire. But look, most of it's contained. There's not really any concern about that spilling out of the areas that we're cooking with it in, and so they're okay with that side of things. It's more within the extraction itself. What do you do if because I mean, as you know, one of the side effects is when you're cooking with fire, all the sap and everything that's within that smoke and those compounds, that will then form together in a thing called creosote, I believe. Which in itself, it's like a flaky, sooty compound that builds up within the. I'm not an expert in these issues, but within that, but that itself can be quite flammable, right? At a certain point.
Creosote ignites at about 73 degrees. So it's not hard to light it. No. Yeah.
And this is where the issues come in. We need to have a practice so that if you suspect anything's happening within that hood, we'll have misting system which arrests the sparks as they're going up. So it's sort of you're minimizing that impact of any of that happening with that part alone. But then, if you do suspect, we just have a really good system. We train the guys often. We've got the procedure stuck up on a wall in Agnes. Everybody knows what it is. If you suspect there's a fire, you keep the fan running, you get the extinguisher and you discharge the extinguisher with the fan still running into that particular hood. So that will really just give you the best chance of that being sucked through the CO2 and extinguishing that fire, so we have a chance to continue from there. But then also it's just the cleaning schedules. We make sure that they're really regular and we're staying on top of that, that the guys are coming in and cleaning the duct properly. But I mean, at Agnes, the issue we had was the initial setup and the build. We didn't really know. We hadn't done it before. We trusted the right thing was being done by the builders. We'd recommend some things to be done, but piece by piece, as it went, it just wasn't really fit for the purpose that we built it in the beginning. And the first thing was they had a fan that was not really heat rated to the point that it needed to be, and it was plastic. And I think day 2 that shut down during service because it's got a trigger on it that if it gets too hot and it starts to warp, shuts itself off, and as soon as that happened, we had all the smoke just dumped back out into the restaurant, and it wasn't working. It was panic stations, and we're shoveling all the coals out and the burning wood and putting it into the oven and putting the chock on, so we're minimizing that impact. But I mean, all those things are important, but then it's also making sure there's enough access to all the panels that the guys that are cleaning it can get in there and do it properly, and the spray filter system's working properly, that it's not filling with water. The ducts at one point, they were made from it was an alloy that was a little bit corrosive, so as the water from the spray filters were getting into it, it was starting to leak, and there were these issues. So we've fully overhauled and replaced everything there now, and now we know what we're doing with it. And then through the help of guys like yourself, Rob, who's been massively instrumental in being able to solve all these problems for us, and in retrospect, we would just I wouldn't trust anyone else at this point. Like, we would really just want the experts working on this from day one.
You're very kind there, Ben. I do want to drill into and I know it's time to sort of wrap this up, but in terms of the challenges you face, so let's go through it. You've talked about staff morale, you've talked about expenditure like $20,000 worth of wood. You've got customers who come in and you really want to make sure they have a memorable moment. So those are the sorts of challenges that you've got. What elements of the building make a big difference? And so my engineers will dwell on that and think about that. And then what other non-building elements? We'll start with the building ones, but we also want to touch on what other elements have an impact on achieving those goals, those 3 goals.
I hope I can answer well for you, but I would say, for me, I mean, the things need to be built well. They need to be built to function. Within a space, well, during the design phase of things, you need to build some spaces that have some interesting play of light and direction and how those things filter in that add into the customer experience. Overall, just making sure everything functions the way that it's supposed to function is the most important part. Getting all
reliability.
Reliability, totally.
Reliability, yeah.
How much bridging the gap between the architects that you've chosen, that's putting everything together, and if it's actually functional for the builder, and that those two are talking properly and they're getting the information that they need, is a big challenge, and it's something that we always work on to make sure you get there, because I don't think those two parts often come together perfectly.
There's a natural, architects are often extremely creative and they want the best for you. Yeah. And of course, almost the challenge with creativity is reliability. How many times have you done this before, kind of a question. So you can understand the way that those two worlds collide a bit.
And trusting that the corners aren't being cut to make things more economical, but then also being hidden away in a way that just causes problems later on. I mean, that's another big one. And we've learned that through, not to split hairs with the costs, to actually, this project that we're doing next year is just enormous, and, sinking $18 million into it, which is more money than I ever thought I would ever see. But it's quite a big project. But I mean, we just know it's not worth cutting corners on things to do with the building, just to make sure that you're getting the right materials for the right reasons and they're being used properly in the right areas. And that starts with the architect, it starts with the designer, and then that's got to filter down through into the builds again. But like you said, it's working with people you trust that understand that ethos, that trust us as well. I mean, there's not a limitless amount of money that you can keep, tapping into to get these things going. But
So Ben, if we can just jump back into the Agnes restaurant. So for everyone's benefit, there's a number of open fires, primarily for meat, and there's like what looks to my humble eyes like a sort of a pizza oven. And it's a more enclosed sort of a space. How much how much does flexibility have to come into this? Because I think once you've built those things, it's hard to say, look, I need just another 500 mils. How do you cope with the requirement for flexibility, which could be flexibility of menu?
Yeah, I mean, you have to. Well, I mean, if we're doing more restaurants that have a fire cooking aspect to it, but also outside of that, again, I think the menu comes first, and then you would design a kitchen around what that menu is going to look like to make sure you have the right spaces with the right things to be able to cope with it. But I would always write the menu, and then before we design the kitchen, that would be considered for those individual spaces, because it would be, and the way Agnes was designed specifically, if this helps illustrate the point. When you're looking at the kitchen from the dining room, on the left-hand side is the larger hearth, which is basically just a bricked-in fireplace with an exhaust on the top. That one there was always intended to be for the starters and the mid-courses. So if you're looking at a menu, you would have sort of snacks at the start, and then you would go down into your entrees or mid-course, then into your mains, and then desserts follow on, and sides part of that as well. So that part was always designed to be the first half of the menu of where those items come, thinking that it's grilling things. There's one section that's like more of a Japanese grill, so that's sticks and skewers and things that you can easily have over the top of the coals in the fire. At the back of that, you would have where we render the wood down into coal to pull into the front for that grilling, and then over that part that's burning at the back, that's where we would hang. If you have a larger item, so say, think for a dessert, a pineapple that's been peeled, we would hang that pineapple above that fire so that that's going to slow cook and caramelize, but also take on a bit more of those volatile elements that wouldn't get from the coal, right? Or you would hang the whole chicken up in that area on a chain. Because we basically, what we did, I had a guy make a grid to sit in the top of the hood as well. It's actually a wrought iron grid, just think like a lattice. The reason we did that, so that over the fire that's burning at the bottom, you can hang anything at any point from that. They can hang whatever on chains and hooks so that you can slow cook things. Because the other thing with fire is very dry and it's a very aggressive way of cooking. Doesn't retain moisture well. So you want to kind of slow cook things more. And then that gets more of the flavor of the flames into it as well. So, the whole thing's really just set up so that you can use any part within that grid for any reason. And we've actually, because it's made out of wrought iron, it's all very stable and it's very solid. We hang that smoker from the top. We hang racks that we can put rest things that are up the top that are higher above it, so they're still taking on that heat and just slowly cooking through. So it's like a gentle way of cooking, I guess. But it's all really like a bit like Lego. You can take a little piece of that, you can move it there, or that can shift over here on the other side, or we'll put this pot over there. I mean, we had some pots made for us that were designed to sort of steam over the top of the fire. So imagine like a big cooking pot. It's got a hole in the side and a grid on the bottom, so you can fill that with anything wet. So wet wood chips in the bottom, or even seaweed like kelp, and then you would have another little insert that's a mesh that sits on top, and then a lid. So it's almost like a little open fire steamer that as the fire's burning, it still lets the smoke through, but it also brings that moisture so you can steam things within it. So yeah, it's really fun. It's just trying to find all these different ways that we can piece. But that side of the kitchen was designed for that half of the menu. The other side, we've got two sort of what they call a perilla grills. So it's a grill that you can move up and down over the top. That's for cooking your mains, your pork steaks, your steaks, prawns, fish, anything you want to cook quickly. But for the other half, that gets done over those grills. And then the oven itself for all your sides, potatoes in skillets and big heavy wrought iron skillets full of things, and we roast meatballs, or during the prep, these big wrought iron trays that I had made as well, some out of mild steel, very thick, that you can pile in tomatoes and root veggies or anything, and you roast them all together and they just slowly come down because that metal's so thick and it retains its heat so well that it's such a fun way of cooking. I don't know why more people don't do it, but obviously, as $20,000 of firewood a quarter, it's a very expensive way of cooking too. We do it for the love.
Ben, your passion is just bouncing right off the screen here. So I want to just thank you for the time you've given us. I hope you haven't shared too many insights. I can imagine some chefs that are probably scribbling down notes here about what you've got and what you do. I do think one of the takeaways for our listeners is that that sense that in many ways, whether you're running a restaurant or running a services business, some of these things remain key: the staff morale, the good ingredients, and I guess the funny mix of creativity, but training and monitoring how things go. I think there's some stuff in there that I feel like you're kind of talking to me about, the mistakes that we've made, all the things that we've learnt from in our own place. Thank you for your time, Ben. Tremendously valuable. And I hope to catch you well. I think, Rebecca, we've got another one of these in a fortnight's time. I can't remember who we're talking to. Was it a heritage architect we had in mind? So next time we'll be talking about heritage buildings, is it? I think it might be.
I think so.
Well,
that sounds...
maybe it hasn't been organised by myself, by the sound of it. But we do wish to pull apart every type of industry that we're working with to really understand what makes them tick and how we can serve them best. Ben, thanks many times.
Pleasure.
All the best.
Anytime. Thanks so much, Rob. Thanks, Rebecca.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ben.
Bye.
Nice to meet you.
You too.